Really happy to be joined today by Claire de Lune, musician, NBA writer. A lot of things we could say to describe you, Claire, but thank you for joining the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be back. I feel like it's been kind of like maybe a couple years since I've done
Couple
your show. So
years. Yeah, I think so. We've expanded a little bit more into video, so appreciate
yeah,
you coming on and doing a little bit of audio and video today.
pleasure.
The occasion could be anything, of course, but the Wolves and Lakers play this Friday,
I do.
and the
Why does that
Lakers
sound like a threat?
are I mean, right? It's like it's at a certain point for either team that could have been a threat. The Wolves kind of trending a little bit better
For sure.
lately. The Lakers,
Not as much.
not
Yeah.
not so much. So I want to talk about them. Obviously, you write a lot about the Lakers and the NBA for the Guardian, and you watch pretty much any Lakers game anyway, right?
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Yeah. I watch so much NBA. I think I probably watch like an average of like 2 to 3 games a day in general.
That's a
So
lot. That's a lot. That's
I
a lot.
consume just an obnoxious amount of basketball.
Well, I mean, before we talk about the Lakers, and like, what do you make of the season so far? There's a lot of juicy storylines and a lot of good teams. It feels like.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I feel like this feels like it's been the theme for a couple of years running, but it just feels like injuries have been kind of so rampant, and I
Yeah.
don't know what there really is to be done about that. But it just when I think back on the first quarter of the season, we're at like around the 20 game mark. Like I just think about how injuries have just been ravaging the league. But I think it's cool. I think the East is a bit of a dumpster fire. I wouldn't
Oh,
really
yeah.
give credence to more than maybe 3 or 4 teams in the East, but the West is
Yeah.
like this is the most parity. I know we say it feels like we say this every year, but this is the most parity I can remember as long as I've been covering the NBA. Like I truly, OKC feels like they've kind of levitated a little bit above the rest, but they've
Hmm.
been dealing with some bad injury luck as well. But besides that, I feel like as far as like the conference finals, I wouldn't say OKC is like a shoe-in for the conference finals, but I would be surprised if they're not there. However, for that second team in the conference finals, I really feel like I've never been less sure of who that's going to be.
That's a good point. There's like 6 teams that wouldn't surprise me, right? At this
For
point, there's like
sure.
a lot of good teams in the West End, but not necessarily that second great team. And you're right, OKC's got they got to deal with Chet Holmgren right now, but you know, at least as long as it's not like catastrophic, like end of year injury, it kind of feels like a team like OKC can weather that because they're
For
just
sure.
so deep and so good. The Lakers. I'll start with LeBron, just because I was thinking about LeBron today, obviously, and you're a bit of a professional and amateur LeBron historian because you
Both,
keep
yeah.
right. I mean, you if it wasn't for work, it would be for fun anyway.
Yes,
I did
absolutely.
I did a story on LeBron in 2003. I traveled to a high school tournament, like this one of these big showcases in North Carolina when he was still with St. Vincent St. Mary's out of Akron, just because he was the story of everything then, even though there was no association with Minnesota, even though there was no association with any chance the Timberwolves were going to draft him because Timberwolves were good back then, and they didn't have a lot of draft picks back then because of the Joe Smith debacle.
Yeah.
But yeah, like just thinking about that, like that was 21, almost 22 years ago.
Yeah.
He's almost 40. He's going to be 40 in a couple weeks, December 30th. He has a son playing in the NBA with
So
him
wild.
now,
Yeah.
and he's still playing at an extremely high level. And probably the most controversial thing you could ever say about him is that maybe he didn't handle his exit from Cleveland the smoothest when he did the whole thing with Miami. Like, how is this guy? How has he done it? I don't understand. I feel like we appreciate him, but can't possibly appreciate him enough.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a miracle, and I think, we're talking about it in real time, and I think that people are giving him some level of credit in real time, of course, and I would never argue otherwise, but I do think that even more so once he's retired at some point in the probably not super distant future, we're gonna really look back at how special this was. But it's a combo. I mean, I think obviously he has some God-given gifts and, God-given body, but like he
Yeah.
takes incredible care of himself. It's been talked about to death, but it's just so true. Like I did a story last year on player longevity, and the original sort of like thesis of my story um, was that like when I set out to write it, I was like, my idea of what the story was going to be is that we're trending in a direction where players can play older and older because
Right.
of all these, advents in medicine and player health and whatever. What I found was it's actually not trending in that direction. It's more
Hmm.
so that we're living in like this golden era of older talent.
Okay.
So it's less that players are going to play older and older, and more so that we're living in like a really special time of with Steph and KD and LeBron, of
Yeah.
these older guys who are just playing at this incredibly high level. And what the sort of moral of the story was is that they've kind of laid out the blueprint, but the because guys are making so much money now, unless you really like, for lack of a like excuse the cliche, but just like love of the game is kind of what
Yeah.
keeps guys in it. And so because guys don't have to play forever now, I
Yeah.
feels like that's why it's not trending older and older. But if you want to play for a really long time, guys like LeBron are leaving the blueprint behind of how you do that. And it's really just like almost maniacal dedication to the craft, to your health, to a regimen, sleep and recovery.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I feel like people want to be like first to say, "Hey, this guy is washed. He's losing it." Like I tried to do.
Yeah.
I feel like I fell into that trap with Tom Brady. Like every time Tom Brady had a bad game over the age of 40, I'd be like, "Oh, there it is. There's the decline." Then he'd have like four
Yeah,
great games in a row. Like I feel like that's happening with LeBron now,
for
where
sure.
people are like, "Ah, yep, there it is." And then the next thing you know, he drops like 39 and 16, and you're like, "Oh,
Yeah.
I guess you still got it." So, like, what do you
39
think?
triple
Why
double,
why
yeah.
why are we so quick to want to prove that he doesn't have it anymore?
I mean, I think that that's the nature of success, is that people root for you when you're an underdog and when you're on the way up, and they want to see you win. And as soon as you hit the top, they're just counting the minutes until you fall. I mean, that's just the way we do it, because I think, the sad truth of becoming successful is that people admire you and envy you in equal measure, and
Hmm.
they're looking for proof that you don't deserve it. Like as soon as you get there, they want to find evidence that it's a fraud. It's you really weren't as amazing as everybody said you were. It's the weird double-edged sword of success. And so I
Yeah.
think and I'm sure in Minnesota, like you're seeing that happen to Ant right now. Like it didn't take very long of him being like the feel good story of the NBA before people were like looking for chips in the armor. So
Mhm.
yeah, I think that with LeBron, everyone, it's like I found that, people are almost like giddy when he had a little bit of a slide
Right.
this year, and they were
Yeah.
like, see, I knew he wasn't superhuman. I knew
Yeah.
that he couldn't do it.
Right.
Um, Whereas, like, the reality of it is that he is not superhuman. He is a human being doing incredible things. And
Yeah.
I personally just like am in awe of it. And I am very grateful to be covering the NBA at a time where I can be, so close to it and see him in the locker room every day. And it's an amazing thing to be a part of. But I definitely have noticed that like the almost, yeah, joy that people got out of
Yeah.
him starting to decline is very indicative of human nature, I would say.
Maybe it's just summed up as haters gonna hate. I don't know. It's
Haters
just
gonna
it's
hate,
very strange to
truly.
yeah, but it's just it's weird to me. We should be celebrating this, enjoying him because he's just a joy. And the off court stuff is almost as impressive to me as the career he's had as a player. Like just the scrutiny, the spotlight. He's very thoughtful. I mean, you see it more often than I do, obviously, but just
Yeah,
the answers he gives, the stewardship of the game. Like he is one of the iconic athletes of our time, but he also like is this kind of he's grown into this kind of like wise figure where you're just like, I want to know what he's saying, not just
yeah.
want to watch him play.
Yeah, I mean, I think he takes his, role as like the kind of face of the league very seriously. And I think I was talking to a friend the other night about like who's going to be next as far as face of the league. And I think, it's not just talent, it's not just market, it's not just charisma, like those leadership qualities and sort of like the understanding the gravity and the weight of being an ambassador for the league is,
Yeah.
I think, a lot of it. I personally think, to bring up Ant again, I swear I'm not
Hmm.
pandering, but I
Yeah.
I
No,
think
it's
Ant is his leadership qualities are maybe the most impressive thing about him. I've been so impressed with how he's led his team, and that to me is the biggest sign that he could be somebody that could be like a face of the league kind of person
Sure.
one day. I think he's a little bit he like thumbs his face at authority a little bit more than like a someone
He's,
like LeBron does,
of course. Yeah.
but I do think he understands what it is to be a leader, and I think that's something that LeBron I think is been grossly underrated
Oh
as
yeah.
a leader, not necessarily of his own individual team, but of a sport. And
Yeah.
I think he's done a pretty remarkable job of that, having been handed the reins at such a young age.
I think Ant's authenticity plays in this era. I think people want that right now, maybe more so
Yeah,
than they ever have. So I think that's what he's got primarily going from in addition to talent. Like people just look at him and say, he's got no filter. Like he will just say whatever. And it's usually pretty funny. Sometimes it's, sometimes you're just like, maybe he shouldn't have said that. But usually it's just like, that was funny. Like that's just
yeah.
Ant being Ant. And I think that's kind of a remarkable quality to be able to have. If I'm old enough to have gone and done a story on a high school LeBron, I'm certainly old enough to remember when JJ Redick was a coaching genius. What happened in the last few weeks?
I jinxed him. I took full responsibility for the Lakers
I,
backside. I
I
wrote a
I was
piece
look I
about
was looking at that piece. I will admit I was looking at that Guardian
I
piece you
actually
wrote.
stand behind everything I said in the sense of I do think that he kind of is a coaching savant as far as like first of all, like the X's and O's part of
Yeah.
it. And I would say like he's been incredible at handling like the scrutiny and the pressure of coaching the Lakers, which is like one of the most high profile jobs in sports, period.
Oh yeah. Right.
I think he's been very candid and honest in a lot of his messaging to the press. And,
Yeah.
especially with this locker room, I think that maybe sometimes I don't, this is speculation on my part. I haven't
Sure.
had anyone like
Yeah.
tell me this directly, but I think that, maybe sometimes that doesn't always go over super well. But so I think that's the learning curve for him. I think the biggest learning curve for him as a coach is not necessarily rotations or X's and O's. I think he's been
Hmm.
honestly kind of insanely good at that already. I mean,
Okay.
I think that comes to him quite naturally. He doesn't have a whole lot of people to rotate at the moment, and
No,
they're
he
they're
does not.
pretty they're
Yeah.
pretty banged up. So there is that. But I think the learning curve for him will be figuring out like how hard to push and how much of that to do publicly and how much of that to do privately, because I think that is kind of an understated part of being a coach is that it's a personnel job, it's a people job,
Yeah.
more than it's a basketball job, and I think that's the part where he's learning, but I think he's all on balance, I think he's been really impressive still.
Well, and he's, not just him, but like the veteran talent on the team, LeBron and Anthony Davis at the forefront. Obviously, like they're trying to squeeze like one, whether it's one, whatever it is, like one more like legitimate run out of this. Like everybody wants, any Lakers fan wants that for LeBron, wants that for the Lakers, wants that for
Yeah,
Anthony Davis, and like Davis kind of has to be the one in some of those cases. He's got to be the guy because he's the
for
younger
sure.
one. He's got all
Yeah.
that talent. LeBron is almost 40, but like how does that whole swirl play into this season where it's like everybody you're pushing so hard, but the nucleus of the roster, like, is it really there? I don't. You got a first year head coach. It's an interesting dynamic for them right now.
I mean, I can't really imagine as a first year head coach coming into a situation where it's not just win now, but it's like win this year. This year. Like this year
Yeah,
is
win every
ultimately
game.
probably
Yeah,
your
yeah.
last chance with these two guys as your core to
Right.
win. Um in addition to that, I would say their biggest issue is that they don't have a championship roster right now. They have a
No.
championship nucleus. I think you can win a championship with LeBron James and Anthony Davis, even 40-year-old LeBron
Yeah.
James, even especially this version of Anthony Davis, who was off to like an MVP start to start the season. Um, I would argue that the front office hasn't invested enough around them. They've been really reticent to use their two remaining first round picks. They didn't use them this summer. They didn't use them at last year's trade deadline. So, the original messaging from the Lakers front office was that they were waiting to like push all their chips into the center for a star. That hasn't come to fruition. So I
Right.
think it's sort of like it feels like the front office has been hedging a little too much in between the two timelines. It kind of reminds me of like what Golden State did in the Steph Curry
Mhm.
situation where they're like, we don't want to abandon our future, but we also have this star that like we could win now and we want to do right by him. And I feel like the ultimate truth of a front office is it's like, unless you're Sam Presti, it's damn near impossible to do both. So you kind
Yeah.
of just have to decide, like, are you going to go for it this year while Anthony Davis is playing at this level, while LeBron James probably has his last chance to really go for it?
Yeah.
Or are you going to abandon ship and decide it's time to just completely reset and start over on the timeline? And in that situation, I personally would just say you have to let Anthony Davis and LeBron James go and just like really rebuild. But
Yeah.
they don't have their pick this year. Atlanta has the rights to their first round pick, so it's not a very appealing rebuilding situation when you don't even get to keep your draft pick. Excuse me.
I've seen you. I don't know if you're at the forefront of this. The Walker Kessler fascination. Is
Oh
that
yeah.
just you, or is that everybody in Lakers that
I
wants
got that
Walker
idea
Kessler?
from my friend Jovan Buha, who's the
Okay.
he writes about the Lakers for The Athletic. He's their beat
Okay.
writer.
Got it.
He was the first one to bring the Walker Kessler idea into my brain, and now I'm obsessed with it because he's the one player I think they could move for this trade deadline that would actually do both of those things, the
Yeah.
kind of two
Right.
timeline thing, because he's so young, but he's also like really good right now, and he fills a need that they have right now, but he also could be their like big of the future.
Yes.
So, and he's also still on his rookie scale contract, so they could
Mhm.
get him without giving up too much of the very little depth that they do have if they were willing to
Right.
include draft compensation. My
Mhm.
personal like, pie in the sky idea for getting Walker Kessler would be including like one of their rookie scale contracts, like, Jalen Hood-Schifino or whatever, and
Okay.
then a first round pick because they have two to play with.
Okay. Yeah.
Utah already has the rights to one of their first round picks, but it's protected. So if you took away the
Oh.
protections from
Yeah.
that second pick, that kind of functions as including another pick in a way.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So that would be my Walker Kessler trade proposal would be like a first round pick, removing protections from the other first round pick, and like Jalen Hood-Schifino or comparable salary.
It seems reasonable, and that brings it full circle for a Wolves fan because, of course, Walker
Yeah,
Kessler was the
in the
pick
Rudy
that
Gobert
the Rudy
trade, yes.
Gobert trade, and everybody for like half a year to a year was like, "I'd rather have Walker Kessler than Rudy Gobert. What a disaster!" And then year two, Wolves go to the Western Conference Finals. Rudy Gobert is Defensive Player of the Year, maybe a little bit better than Walker Kessler, although Walker Kessler is a nice young player for sure.
And he makes $2
And of
million
course, I
versus
know. Exactly.
there
But
is that
Gobert does
factor, but yes,
Gobert does a lot. Like everybody, a lot of people hate Rudy Gobert, but he does a lot on the court
for
beyond
sure.
just block shots. Like he is all over the place. Like he is deserving, I think, at least of some of those accolades. Lakers fans might say, "Yeah, could Anthony Davis have won Defensive Player of the Year last year? Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I could think." But the Wolves, team success probably played into that a
Oh,
little bit as
1000%.
well. And the Wolves though also were involved in you had that whole kind of triangulation with Utah and the Lakers with the D'Lo trade. Conley comes here, and you get the guys that get dispatched out. Um, I wonder what the Lakers would look like if Conley had wound up there as opposed to D'Lo. Do you ever think about that? Like what he might have added to that mix as opposed to D'Lo? And I've never been a big D'Lo guy, so I want to know how you think of him there.
I think it's interesting because, I mean, I love Mike Conley. He's such a good locker room guy, and he's an incredible leader. I don't know. I think he is more needed in Minnesota's structure, I think, in the sense of, like, I think his, like, steady hand and veteran leadership,
Hmm.
and obviously court vision are something that, like, I would think the one thing that Ant still has to progress on as,
Yeah,
the center of the team is his, like, decision making on the court and his
yeah,
facilitation, so having, like, a Mike Conley is, like, super beneficial to Minnesota. I think obviously any team would love a Mike Conley, and especially in a playoff setting, I think I would take Mike Conley over D'Lo, even, like, older Mike Conley.
right.
But I think, this is not to say that I like love D'Lo, want them to keep D'Lo. I've been a huge proponent of them trading D'Lo if possible, but I do think that like D'Lo is able to get red hot on any given night in the regular
Hmm.
season. He also is a really great facilitator. I think he doesn't get enough credit for that. Like I think he had like 14 assists the other night when LeBron was out,
Sure.
and so I think D'Lo kind of fills a need that the Lakers have during the regular season, which is like they need someone to run the floor when LeBron is not on the floor, and they need someone to score. And I think he's very adept at both of those things. It's more so in the playoffs, specifically against the Denver Nuggets, but just in general
Uh-huh.
in the playoffs, that you start to see the warts with D'Lo and his sort of shortcomings. But I think they kind of ended up, as far as regular 82 games goes, they kind of both ended up where they're more helpful. So
I think that's fair. I think that's fair. And I think D'Lo wasn't ever in an ideal situation here. So maybe it worked out for the best. Maybe he'll end up being what they need eventually. I think I saw on social media you had posted something like with last time the Wolves basically ran the Lakers in LA
yeah,
a
that
week or
was
so
embarrassing.
ago, and it was like the Wolves were terrible up until like the game before that, and they got a squeaker against the Clippers where they started to kind of find their defensive identity. It was the game after Ant went off and talked about, asked local reporters like, "You guys want to know why we're trash? This is why we're trash." And then they started
Yeah.
playing better, and then they did 80 points against the Lakers. I think 80 against the Clippers the next time out. Then they handled Golden State, then just lost one to Golden State lately. But you were something like they sure they finally figured out right before they play the Lakers. Like, of course, right?
They got back to their team identity like just in time to play the Lakers, but I feel like that's classic Timberwolves Lakers. Like I feel like I don't remember what the stat was, but I think in because that game was in Minnesota, and I think the Lakers are something like 2-14 or 2-13 against the Wolves in Minnesota the last few years. So I think the Wolves always get up for the Lakers when they come to town,
Yeah,
as they should. So that was the fact that they won wasn't surprising. The way that they won was
yeah.
like it was a full ass beating. I mean, truly, just there
it,
was
it
there was
was
no question marks about who was going to
no.
win that game. So I'm really curious to see how both teams respond in the rematch this week because that's really unusual for a rematch to happen. Like you basically have like what 10 days or something in between
Yeah,
games and then you just redo the exact same circumstances like on the road for the
yeah.
Lakers
Same
and
home team, right? Yeah,
so I'm really curious to see. I think it'll be very telling about like the character. I have some questions personally about the character of this Lakers team, but like I
sure.
think it'll be really telling about their intestinal fortitude of how they're going to respond when they have an opportunity to get their lick back. So I'll be watching that one. I'm really curious.
I can't remember if I saw you post that on Twitter/X or Blue Sky. I think you were living in both spaces. I'm kind of living in both
Yeah,
spaces right now.
I have a foot in
What do
each world right now.
what do you think? Is basketball Twitter evolved enough in Blue Sky yet, or what do you like about each platform or not like about each platform? I'm curious.
I mean, I feel nostalgic for the Twitter that I loved.
Oh,
It
exactly.
just
That's me
doesn't
too. Yeah.
exist anywhere
No,
anymore. It doesn't exist on
no.
Twitter or X or whatever, and it doesn't exist on Blue Sky either. I
But it's
do feel like
close.
Blue
It's
Sky
closer there though. It's closer on
I
Blue
do
Sky now
think
than
it's
on
closer
X.
on Blue Sky, and I think Blue Sky kinda reminds me of what Twitter was like in the beginning, like, before it really started
Yeah.
popping off, where it's sort of like there's a lot of functionality missing from the platform that they haven't added yet because it's so new, and
Right.
there's a lot of, like, people there who aren't there yet, but it feels like the start of a thing, and I think it will I mean, my engagement is so much higher on Blue Sky already than it is on
Hmm.
Twitter because I feel like people just aren't on it anymore, and then also the algorithm is just like, this is, like, very
Right.
inside
Messed
baseball
up.
boring stuff,
No, it is. It's true though. It's very
um,
true.
but I don't know if anything here's my thing. I think Blue Sky will eventually like, I already forget which one is which sometimes when I'm on them, which is a really good sign,
Mhm.
as far as, like, wait, where did I post? Because it's like my
Yeah.
timeline is,
Right.
like, relatively similar at this point. I don't
Yeah.
think anything's ever gonna be what NBA Twitter was in, like, the, like, mid-2010s. Like, I feel like 10 years ago,
Yeah.
NBA Twitter on
No.
actual Twitter, I feel like
Yeah.
that was just maybe a golden era of, like, that type of social media, and I think
Yeah.
we might just be past it. But I think I'd rather be on Blue Sky than Twitter right now just because every time I post on Twitter, I feel like it's like that meme of the guy opening the door and everything's on fire. And, like, that's how I feel whenever I actually do feel like I should start calling it X because it doesn't feel like Twitter
That's true.
anymore. So
That's
it's like
true.
I used to be like, "I'll never
Yeah.
call it X because that's just so
Right.
freaking dorky." But, like,
Right.
it is a different thing now. It
It
isn't
is.
what Twitter was.
No, that's true. Maybe I'll start doing that too. I'm a holdout too because I feel like I just can't call it what they want to call it, but
Yeah.
maybe there's a and we don't I'm not calling them skeets either. Are you
No, I
calling
just
them
call them
skeets?
tweets. They're
I
just
call them
tweets.
posts. I say they're posts.
Posts?
I mean, to each their own, but I can't call it a skeet. I cannot call it a skeet.
For the sake of your career, that's actually probably wise.
That's that's true. Um, so final things here.
Yeah,
You you have a very interesting life and career because you've got this like major music career, Tiny Deaths, like
I
all
don't
the
know if I'd call
music
it
you do.
major, but it is a music
Oh,
career.
oh, oh, and you put up. I mean, you're a professional musician, and
I
you're
am,
also you're a professional NBA writer. Like these two things don't necessarily usually exist side by side. For you,
yeah.
they exist and work side by side. How do you make that work? How does that work for you?
Honestly, I don't that well. I feel like I'm
Okay.
usually neglecting one or the other. Like, right now, I feel
Okay.
like I'm neglecting music a little bit because I've been so
Okay.
busy with basketball stuff, and there's been times, like, I had an album come out last fall, and at that time, I felt like I was sort of, like, neglecting the basketball stuff because
Okay.
I was so busy with music, so I feel like it's like when you ask a working parent, like, "How do you balance it?" It's like you kinda don't. You're always sort of neglecting something, but I will say, like, my life philosophy, my career philosophy is like I just want to spend as much time while I'm here on this planet doing things that I love as possible. Like as many hours of my life can be spent
Yeah.
doing things that I love. And that's sort of my like guiding light. And that's the reason why I have such a bizarre career path is because I just do all the things I like.
But it's a great philosophy, though. Like more people should do it. But I also imagine that as much as people might want to do that, like it takes two very separate skill sets to be
For
a
sure.
musician and an NBA writer. Like those are not two things that necessarily transfer into each other.
No, for sure. I think the one thing I will say though is like I am a storyteller, I'm a writer, whether it's, you know, writing songs, writing articles, even like in an audio format. I just feel like that's always been what I've done since I was a little kid. And even I used to
Mhm.
like paint and draw when I was little. And to me, the joy in that was like in creating like a world and telling a story in that way. So I think while the skills may not be like immediately obviously transferable, I think at the end of the day, like if you enjoy being creative and telling stories, those skills kind of transfer to both. And I find as a someone who's been writing songs since I was a little kid,
Mhm.
those skills like of just like wordplay and a
Sure.
way with words, I think have been obviously very helpful in my job as a sports writer. So kind
Yeah.
of a bizarre path, but it makes sense for me.
It makes sense for you. And I asked I before we started recording, I said, "Is it okay to ask you about this?" Because I didn't realize this. Like you were in a group with Lizzo, like more than
Yes.
a decade ago. You were in a group with Lizzo. Like what
Was
was
it really more than
that
oh
was
my god, it was more than a decade. I'm
sorry. I'm
so
sorry.
old.
Yeah, I mean, I'm aging everybody here. I'm old. I'm way older
Oh,
than you, so don't
man.
worry. But yeah,
Oh.
what was that experience like? Like, tell me a little bit more about that.
It was great. I mean, I was in my early 20s. So yeah, just to like you can really date that now.
Do the math. Yeah.
Do the math in my early 30s now. But yeah, I was in my early 20s and it was I really we were in like a hip hop girl group called the
Yeah.
Chalice and it was like we had choreographed dances and matching outfits and it very much felt like I was like playing like acting, like playing a part, but I had
Okay.
so much fun with it and we were only a group for like 2 years, but we did so much in those 2 years and um like, I mean, I was it was a really fun ride, and I feel like I learned a lot from it, but it also feels like another lifetime, like, it's I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
it's crazy.
Yeah. Well, obviously you've gone on to do more and bigger and better things, and so has Lizzo. Lizzo's not an NBA writer though, to my knowledge. So
No.
there
Sorry,
you
yeah,
go.
I have that going for me. She's probably never even been in an NBA locker room, so
Probably not. Maybe she needs
I'm
to
just
write a
saying.
song about
She's doing fine. I think she's doing okay. She's probably
she's
pretty happy with how things worked out.
maybe she needs to do a song about the Minnesota Timberwolves, not the Minnesota Vikings next. All right. Claire, thank you so much. I'm looking forward to Friday's game. I hope your holidays treat you well. I hope things
Thank
slow
you.
down or speed up, whichever one you want them to do. 'Cause sometimes it's
Maybe a
fun to
little
be busy,
column A, a
right?
little column B.
Yeah, right. Slow down at the right time, speed up at the right times.
Yes.
Appreciate it as always. Good to catch up. Good luck to the Lakers. Good luck to LeBron. Good luck to you, and we'll catch up again down the road.
Thanks so much.